Hi, everyone. This is Shawn Sullivan, Executive Director of Running USA, with our next five questions. And today we are very lucky, and I'm very fortunate to have the opportunity to discuss a few questions. I don't know if I'll get to exactly five. I don't know if I go to six or seven, if they'll keep letting me do this, but we're going to try five questions with the founder and CEO of Joffe Emergency Services, Chris Joffe. So good to see you, Chris. What's going on?
Great to see you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, me too. This is the first time I'm doing this, so we'll, rein me in if necessary. But the idea here is number one. I want to say thank you for being a member of our board. Thank you for being a member of Running USA, and thank you for the critical work that you do. So that kind of gives me a segue to my first question: is how did you get into this role? Where are you from? What created this desire to help? Which I think is at the end of the day what you're doing.
Yeah, it's a complicated question with a complicated long answer, so I apologize in advance. But I'll tell you, I started my career actually in EMS. I was a 911 responder, various different capacities, various different departments, and I importantly, like I was really young. I was 18 years old when all of this first really started. And what would happen is I would get to a call and somebody would have dialed 911 and said, "Hey, come help us." We'd get in the ambulance, we'd go. And I'd get there and everybody would be standing there watching this patient, often suffering, needing help, needing something, but they wouldn't have done anything. And so I asked them actually three questions, not five. I used to ask the question, number one, why didn't you help? And I found a trauma-informed way to ask that. So often I would say, like, what were you doing? What was this group doing while you were waiting for us to arrive? Which kind of shifted it to us. We were late, those sorts of things. And really, that was the most important question. And I got a handful of answers. People would say either they didn't know what to do, they were afraid that helping would cause harm, right? If they were afraid that helping somebody would make the situation worse. Or, and this is important context, I started in Southern California, they would say they were afraid they were going to get sued. And so I thought to myself, again, 18 years old, I'm going to change the world. I'm going to start a CPR and first aid training company, and I'm going to teach everybody what to do. I'm going to make sure that they know how to do it and that they know they won't make it worse. And I'm also going to make sure that they have the confidence to do it. So when the time comes, they'll actually put it into practice. And over the course of a few years, I started training bigger and bigger organizations, bigger and bigger groups. And I actually left the department. I started doing work on my own full time. And what was kind of wild is as I was working with more and more organizations, I actually needed more and more staff. So I know I said it was going to be long. I'm almost there, I promise. And basically what I discovered was I needed more people to do this training, more people to be present and available to do the work that we were doing. And so I had the sort of harebrained idea at the time that I was going to try to build an event medical organization so that I would have enough EMTs, paramedics, nurses, folks like me who could come in and do this work that could be trainers and that could do this work more full time, more at least more than the typical experience, which was maybe here and there picking up a class or two. So believe it or not, that's how this organization was born. It was kind of a byproduct of another organization. That organization still exists. It still does CPR and first aid training to this day. But I got much more excited about helping it scale and about taking our work not just to an individual class kind of proactively, but to entire organizations and frankly nationwide, and to start doing this preparedness, response, and recovery work all throughout the planning process for major events.
Amazing. Well, I appreciate that answer because I asked three questions in it. So that was a poor start by me, but I'll go to the next one. So, you're in emergency management services. What does that mean? I mean, you're talking about in our world, running world, this idea of supporting events and how they can take care of participants. But then you have another part of the company that is doing really important work too. So can you talk about those two areas of the business?
Absolutely. So we have a bucket of our work that is, and kind of that origin story really is and still is, frankly, in this part of the work, which is we will show up as EMTs, paramedics, doctors, nurses, whatever level of staffing is appropriate to support an event. And that ranges from, we do, parts of the LA Marathon, we do parts of a handful of well, tons and tons at this point of 5Ks across the country, half marathons, etc. Right? So it's those sorts of things. And by the way, we also have some endurance events and field events, Ragnar Relay nationwide, all that kind of stuff. So like some really complex events to be sure. And that continues to be really important work, and we'll build teams that are purpose built around the specific event that we're supporting, and of course are leveled appropriately, all that jazz. The part of the work, though, that is even more inspiring at this moment in time, at least, is the strategy that goes along with that. So all of our races ask the question, well, should I have an ambulance? Should I have 2 EMTs? Do I have a paramedic? Do I have a doctor? I've had for 100 years, I've had a medical director. Should I keep that medical director? Should they be a physician? You've asked this question. You get this. Yeah. And that's the part of the work that's so exciting right now, because what we're finding is a lot of the time we are choosing to do the same thing we've always done because we've always done it that way. And by the way, that's in some ways not the perfect reason to do it, but it's a perfectly fine reason to start. But more importantly, we're starting to have these conversations about like, well, we haven't always had to worry about some of the risks that we are facing today. And so when we were talking about safety 20 years ago, or 27 years ago, maybe, we were talking about medical. Like that was the primary focus. It was like, how are we going to keep people physically healthy? What are we going to do if somebody goes into cardiac arrest? That kind of stuff. Today, that's had to broaden to include active shooter risk, to include vehicular ramming, to include other weapons that may be present. Of course, medical too, and frankly, even a worsening medical environment, right? Our participants, our population is trending a little bit older, right? We're starting to see a little bit more stuff overall. And so that's the other part of the business that I actually think most people don't even really know exists, because if we do our job well, when you call us and you say, hey, we need 2 EMTs, we say, actually, you need this. And so you may not even feel that happening, but what we're actually doing is helping you to create the strategy. And in many cases, we're writing the EOP for you, the emergency operations plan, or we're staffing the command center for you. A lot of our smaller races in particular, right? If you can't bring 40 people together, and DHS and FBI and all the other major governmental acronyms aren't present, maybe you need one command center operator who actually can help you figure out what needs to be true along the way. So that's really the other part of the business, the secret part anyway.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, so if an event director, race director in our case, calls or emails or connects, and what are the right questions for them to ask you?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think the question they always call asking is, how much does this cost, right? So they'll say, I need 2 EMTs. How much does it cost? And the answer is fairly simple. It's like $50 an hour. I don't know, right? Like it's somewhere around there, plus minus 10%. Well, depends on the market, whatever. But the next question ought to be, is that the appropriate solution for my needs? And there are 50 different criteria that we use to assess what you might need. In fact, there's more than 50, but it's everything from, and some of these you'll know, right? You think about weather, because that matters, to paces, it matters to how you're running the day. You may not always be thinking about coincidental events. So, if this happens to be 4th of July, if it happens to be some other date, you may not always be tracking those. But again, most race operators are, especially as you get past maybe that 500 to 1,000 participant level. If you didn't, the city did. So you're like, ooh, okay, we're not running the same direction as this other event, or running into a closed street, those sorts of things. What I'm finding that people are not often asking is, what's our threat profile? What are the potential risks that I'm not actively thinking about? What is the social media chatter that it has to do with our event or has to do with our city that day? What are the potential ways that this event could be disrupted? And again, that could be everything from somebody with violent intent to protesters, right? I mean, it could truly be anything. And that's what makes our work energizing, right? We have to think about all of those different scenarios and plan with you for all of those different scenarios. And I find that, again, especially our smaller races, if you're under 2,500 or so participants, you're often on your own for that. You don't have a ton of city support. You don't have a ton of extra resources where the city comes over your shoulder and they say, hey, did you think of creating this strategy, creating this MOU, this memo of understanding with a local civic center that you could house people in if the weather goes south? You're having to do a lot of that work on your own. And so that's the question I wish people would ask is, is this the right solution? I'll stop there.
That's good feedback. So one of the items that came up as you were answering those questions was this maybe increasing issue we're running into, and that's cardiac arrest with races. As you are consulting and providing your good insights to directors, staffing medical teams, what are some of the, and maybe some of the things you're sharing with them to help prevent those, but maybe just as generally for runners, like what I think we're probably seeing a lot of first timers out there, maybe, but what is the more medical and official response to that issue right now?
Yeah. So I'll start kind of data centered, and then we'll kind of work our way into what we should do about this. Our population is aging, and something that we are not fully wrapping our heads around today is what the effects are of that, right? We're going to see this total decline of population occur starting over the course of the next 30 years. We're seeing the aging of the population over the course of the next 20 to 40 years. As that continues to happen, and that's a trend that's been underway for a little while, it's reasonable to assume that I think at least that there are two major implications for our space. The first is we're going to see older runners because the population's aging. If the net average is going up, our participants ought to follow that trend. The second, and this is more challenging, is we're going to see an increased demand on the infrastructure that supports us. So because our aging population is going to require more support, the fire department is going to be getting more calls. And that bears out as we look at the data for 911 calls over the course of time, as we look at really any data set. We're seeing increased demand on fire, police, EMS, et cetera. And so it follows that some of those events are also cardiac in nature, at least. And so we're seeing certainly more of those types of events. And I gather both seeing more new runners. Maybe we'll see more of that with the Olympics coming back to the U.S. I think we have some good suspicion around that. Certainly aging population, right? We're probably going to see overall more of these major medical concerns. Okay, well, that's not the enlightening and empowering message that we want to be hearing. Like, what do we do with that information? I think there are a few things that I want all of our races to at least pay attention to. The first is build a good plan. And that plan, by the way, should not just be a cardiac arrest plan. I know there are folks who are focused on one part of the strategy, and that's excellent. We need to keep our focus there. Your job as a race director, just as you can't just worry about 1 mile of the race, you've got to worry about all those different risks that could affect us. And so challenge number one is build a good plan that accounts for where are you going to put your medical team, where are you going to put your extra AEDs. Running USA has this AED rental program, so there's opportunities to increase the number of AEDs on course. How are you going to train or how are you going to manage the people that you bring in? Ideally, your volunteers, your staff, anybody that you're bringing in would be CPR and AED certified. Is that realistic that 100% of those folks are? Of course not, but more is better. That's just a general starting place. Yeah. And then, what are the ways that you might be able to add value to the community, right? So maybe you organize a fire department CPR class the Friday before Saturday race day, and you make that available to all of your volunteers. Maybe you pay for that for a group of folks. Everybody's going to have a different structure there, but again, kind of more is better. Thought number two is, in addition to kind of building the plan, making sure that you're also building the people, make sure that your communication infrastructure is solid. Because the truth is, for cardiac arrest, and this is true, again, for so many different emergencies, but cardiac arrest is on our mind, every second really does count. And there's some stats, if you go into cardiac arrest and you're a relatively healthy person to begin with, you're a runner, these things may dovetail. You've got something like a 90% chance of survival if we can get an AED hooked up to you in the first minute after you go down. But to have you hooked up to an AED and to deliver that shock in the first minute, that's heroic. I mean, it happens, but it takes so much communication coordination to get there that quickly. And so, by the way, every minute that goes by, you lose about 10% chance of survival. So 10 minutes later, your chances are really, really low. That's just an average. It's a sort of good idea to operate from. It's not perfect science around every type of cardiac arrest. Everybody's different, et cetera. But it gets us the idea that's most important, which is we've got to do this quickly, and we've got to do it precisely as well. And so I need those volunteers to show up. I need them to be able to get access to the AED. I need them to identify that this is actually a cardiac arrest. I need them to start the CPR, start applying that AED, right, to start doing that work. And while all of that is happening, you have 500, 1,000, 25,000 other runners just running right on by. And so we also need that scene managed so that they can be uninterrupted by helpful or unhelpful other participants. And so I think that's piece number 2 is building the communication infrastructure so that time is working with you and not against you. And that takes us into, if you don't already have a command center design, and this is my command center today, right? I'm not deployed. I'm not at an event. So my command center is my cell phone, my notepad, and my pen. I've got communication here. I've got documentation there. It may just be that, right? You as a race director, it may be you. Oh, throwing things now. And your walkie-talkie and your 3 folks that you have with you or your volunteer team. But having that command center design, I've got somebody who's in charge, somebody who knows what to do, kind of knows that first play to run, and who has the ability to communicate to the folks, at least at start line, finish line, and on course. That's going to get you 75% of the way there. Of course, you've got to have a good plan down. You've got to have somebody who makes decent decisions at that point. So you're not going to get all the way there, but it gets you a long way. And so if you're doing nothing else out of this conversation, I would start there. Have a plan, have well-trained people, build those people up, know how you're going to communicate, and then make sure you've got somebody in charge who's really capable of being responsible for all of that safety.
There's a lot there. So much is on the weight of race directors specifically, and really it doesn't matter how many people are in your event. I mean, it's heavy no matter what. You mentioned the phrase add value. Well, you're going to be adding value to the Running USA Industry Conference coming up January 31st, I believe. It's the day before the conference begins officially in St. Louis at the historic Union Station Hotel, where you'll have Safety Day. Can you touch on, you did this last year, which I know it was well received, and some of that training that you spoke about, some of our conference attendees can take advantage of?
Absolutely. So first of all, I was born in St. Louis. I didn't tell you that, but I was born in St. Louis. I live in LA now. It's much warmer here. I'm much happier. I don't do cold. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. I went for a run yesterday morning. It was like 57 degrees. I should stop here. It's winter for most people. For real. It's winter for me. For fake. Anyway.
Were you wearing like a parka at 57? I always laugh when I go to California and people are like bundled up.
Yeah, I'm not proud of it. I had gloves, I had a parka, I had a beanie. But I was out there. So Safety Day in St. Louis. This is our 3rd time around, maybe, putting together this event. And what we are trying to do is really everything I just talked about. Number 1, we want to give you a plan. And so if you're a race director that has no idea what to do, you're like, maybe your plan is from 50 years ago. Maybe your plan is from Chat GPT, like no shame, right? It's a good plan, but you're like, I need to figure out how to exercise this. We're going to give you a great template, and it's a starting place. It's again, right? Hopefully you'll build from it. We're also going to give you some work time in the session to actually build it out. So you're not going to get 100% of the way done, but you're going to get some good swaths of this thing done. And so that's project number 1 is we want to give you this plan. We want to get you kind of started down that path. Piece number 2, we're going to do some scenario work around how do you handle a cardiac arrest on course? How do you handle an earthquake, a vehicle ramming, some of those incidents as the incident commander, which I know is a term that not everybody's super comfortable with, but it's the person in charge. It's the race director. Really, you are the incident commander. And so how do you handle when those situations happen? And we'll talk for our smaller races about handling them individually or independently. We'll also talk about, for our larger races, handling them with 1,000,001 federal and state agencies that are in the room with you. They are not the same, but they are both really important, and they're both we can and should kind of prepare and train for both. And then the last part of that day is we'll actually CPR and AED certify you. And so that way, at the very least, there's one person there who knows how to do CPR. And the beauty of that is, I don't know whether it'll be on an airplane, at a race, at a school event for your kids, at work, just one random day. But that's a skill that you'll be able to take with you indefinitely. And so that's our game plan for the day.
It's going to be great. Well, we appreciate that. And hopefully folks will leverage that. And you do have to register separately. So go to runningusa.org for more information on that. I also want to touch on this, Chris, and then we'll get out of your hair here. But I see that book in the background. I was checking that out a little bit. You do some really important but sobering work in the school safety realm. Can you touch a little bit up maybe on the book, but also that work? And boy, it seems like every week we're reading more about another incident, unfortunately.
Yeah, we were just talking about that in our team meeting today. So the same work we do on the event side, we do in schools. We really serve two verticals, and that's maybe this is generous, but events overall. So that includes everything from a fixed stadium event all the way to a field event that where we're setting up in the middle of a dirt parking lot with no cell phone service and often no other infrastructure. Again, when I talk to this community, like y'all are like, yeah, that's Tuesday. But in the case of schools, that which is the other group we serve, we do actually the same work. It applies a little bit differently because they're of course in a more stable location. They're dealing with a part of the population that they see all the time, a part of the population they see less. They're dealing with sometimes internal actors as some of the sources of concern. And by the way, that's true for events too. We just don't talk about it as much because we don't necessarily know our people as well. As it turns out, actually, schools and events are communities of people. And at the end of the day, that's our mission, is to make communities safer. And so it is the same mission applied in these two different spaces. The book is all about the school communities specifically and kind of using time as a measure to manage the emergency. I'm a control freak by design, and it makes me feel safe when I'm in charge. So we'll talk about that in therapy separately. But the idea is, if I use time, I start to feel like I can control the emergency. And actually, it turns out we kind of can do that together when we talk about and when we plan for emergencies too. And so I use this thing called the rule of sevens. And in the first 7 seconds, what do I want to cause to occur? In the first 7 minutes, what do I need to occur? We'll actually be doing some of that same work at Safety Day because we're also trying to manage an emergency. And so what do we need? All of our folks, all across the entire event, whether it's 2,000 people or 25,000 people, or for that matter, 200,000 people, what do we need all of those people to do in the first 7 seconds after the emergency occurs? What about the first 7 minutes? What about the first 7 hours? And so we'll actually use those increments of time to manage what needs to be true so that we have a shared understanding of it. And I'll encourage the folks that are with us at Safety Day, I encourage folks that listen anytime, to use that as a framework for communicating within your own organizations.
Awesome. Thank you for that feedback. Okay. Where can folks learn more about Joffe Emergency Services or connect with you on LinkedIn, social media, anywhere, kind of the plug zone, if you will?
Yeah, all of the above. So all of the social medias, except TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, all that jazz, we're on all of those tools. We have a website that details a lot of this work. And honestly, if there's one thing that you do, I would sign up for our newsletter. If you go to our website, go to resources, there's a section for events. And we send out a monthly newsletter that covers everything from, like last month, we were focused on alcohol sales to the very incident command model that we just described. And so throughout the year, we break that down. We try to educate people as much as we can. And all of that stuff is free. We push out a ton of free information in hopes that our mission comes true, that we actually are able to make communities safer.
Good tip there. Okay. Last one. I think I'm at 12 questions now, so I'm well over 5, but you are recently married, so congratulations. What have you learned about teamwork in your first couple months of marriage?
Ooh, this is an interesting question. I was prepared for all the others. maybe there's even an incident command version of this. My wife and I went on an amazing honeymoon. We went on safari. And at one point on the safari, we were talking about like what would happen if there was an emergency, because we're in the middle of nowhere. And I'm me, so I first aid kit with ID bags, a satellite phone. I was ready for anything. But we were talking about what would happen if there was an emergency, and our conclusion was that basically our skills are so complementary. I can fix most of the medical stuff. She can fix all of the psychological stuff together. There really wasn't an emergency that could take us down, and so I think that's what it was. Is complementary skills really is the difference.
Well, that was a surprise question. You handled it very well. It just supports this idea that it is very rarely a life balance and more so life blend. So good work there. Chris Joffe, thank you for your time and joining us on Running USA's 5 Questions. We'll see you and hopefully many others at the Running USA Industry Conference 2026 presented by Haku in St. Louis coming up February 1st through the 3rd. Come a day early. Take advantage of Chris's safety day. And you can learn more at runningusa.org. Take care, everybody.